At Maison Dorel, nothing was accidental. Every light, every plate, every inch of marble whispered the same message. This is not a place for the uninvited. And yet, on a quiet Saturday morning, Elijah Brooks stepped through its glass doors like he belonged. He was 13, composed, with shoes polished to a shine and a quiet confidence in his eyes that didn't ask for permission. He moved to the host stand with measured calm, speaking clearly to the receptionist. "There's a table reserved under Celeste Brooks. I'm here to check in early as requested." The receptionist, Monica, blinked, typing quickly. Elijah waited. Without impatience, hands folded, posture straight. But just as the reservation details began to load, a voice cut through the ambient music like glass breaking. "What is he doing here?" Savannah Whitmore. Blonde hair in a tight ponytail, silk scarf knotted at her neck, the unmistakable daughter of power. She was used to being obeyed, never questioned. She stormed forward, her heels a warning. "This is a private restaurant," she snapped. "Not an after-school program." Monica hesitated. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply turned to face her, steady and silent. But Savannah wasn't done. "You don't get to just walk in here and act like you belong. Not in this place." She looked around, gathering glances like fuel. "I mean, come on, this is Maison Dorel. Who exactly do you think you are?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. But the silence only made her angrier. "Seriously," she said louder. "Does your mom work here or something? Is she in the kitchen? The janitor's closet?" Monica opened her mouth, unsure if she should step in. Elijah stayed composed. He remembered what his mother always told him. "You carry your worth with you. No one gets to take that." Savannah scoffed and crossed her arms. "Well, he's not sitting here. Not in this room. Call security." She didn't wait. She turned on her heel and disappeared behind the main staircase. A few seconds later, her father, Gregory Whitmore, appeared. Gray suit, clipped voice, energy. That said, he was used to being right. "What's going on?" he demanded. Monica explained, barely above a whisper. Gregory didn't check the screen. He didn't ask Elijah for his name. He just looked at the boy and said, "You need to leave. This isn't a drop-in cafe. We have standards." Then he reached out and grabbed Elijah's arm. That's when something shifted. Elijah didn't resist. He simply said, "Sir, I'm not here by mistake. My mother reserved the table. I'm just early." But Gregory didn't stop. "Sure, that's what they all say. We've had enough of people sneaking in." He started pushing Elijah toward the exit. Voices in the dining hall grew quiet. A few heads turned. Elijah didn't cry. He didn't yell. But his face, still focused, betrayed a tightening in his chest. Not fear, not even anger. Just a deep, practiced restraint. And in that moment, as he was being pulled toward the grand double doors, every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Because the doors opened, and a woman walked in. Celeste Brooks. Crisp gray power suit. Leather heels. One hand holding a briefcase. The other, empty. Ready to draw the line. She saw her son's arm in the manager's grip. She didn't shout. She didn't rush. She simply said, in a voice clear enough to stop the entire restaurant, "Take your hand off my son." Everyone froze. Gregory turned. And the moment the name Celeste Brooks clicked in his head, it was too late. Gregory's fingers fell away from Elijah's arm as if they'd been burned. "Ms. Brooks, I didn't realize," he stammered, but Celeste wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her son, eyes locked in quiet understanding. Then slowly, she reached into her blazer and pulled out a small black leather folder. She flipped it open and laid it gently on the host stand. Celeste Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Brooks and Dorel Hospitality. Gregory's face drained of color. Around the dining room, forks paused mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Monica stood frozen, staring at the name glowing on the reservation screen, the same name now sitting under an official gold letterhead badge. "I own this restaurant," Celeste continued, her voice even. "And you just physically removed my son, an invited guest, without confirming his identity, without checking protocol, and most importantly, without basic human decency." Gregory tried to recover. "If I had known, you shouldn't have needed to know," Celeste interrupted, calm but sharp. "You saw a black child standing alone and assumed he didn't belong. You judged him based on your assumptions, not our records, not his words. You didn't ask his name. You didn't verify the reservation. You acted. And you grabbed him." She turned to Monica. "Could you confirm something for me, please? The reservation under my name. Does it specify early check-in for one guest?" Monica, hands trembling slightly, typed quickly and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's right here. Table 3. Early arrival approved. Expedited service." Celeste nodded once. "Thank you." Then she turned back to Gregory. "And now you've not only violated our guest policy, you've humiliated a child in front of my staff, your daughter, and a dining room full of witnesses." Just then, Savannah reappeared, face flushed. "This is getting blown way out of—" "Be quiet," Celeste said sharply, not raising her voice but silencing the girl instantly. "You didn't touch him, no, but you lied. You threatened an employee. You made assumptions, and you made it loud enough for everyone to hear." Savannah swallowed hard, shrinking slightly behind her father. Gregory cleared his throat. "Miss Brooks, please, let's handle this privately. This kind of escalation—" "There is no escalation," Celeste said. "There is consequence. You've operated under my brand for 5 years, and today you reminded every person in this room that titles mean nothing if character doesn't follow." She turned to a sharply dressed woman standing near the edge of the scene, the assistant general manager. "Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore is relieved of all duties. Escort him to his office. Collect his belongings. His access is revoked." Words were clean, clinical, final. Gregory sputtered. "You're overreacting. This was a misunderstanding." Celeste didn't look at him again. She looked at the security staff now approaching. "Please ensure Mr. Whitmore exits calmly." "With more courtesy than he showed my son." They nodded. Elijah, still standing to the side, hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken, but now Celeste turned to him, eyes softening for the first time. She reached out her hand. "Shall we sit down, baby?" And together, they walked past Gregory, past Savannah, past every stunned face in the dining room, and sat at the best table in the house. No one clapped, no one dared, but they watched, because something had shifted. Not just the power in the room, but the entire tone of what was acceptable, what was possible, and what would no longer be ignored. The fallout didn't end with a single termination. It never does. Because what happened that day at Maison Dorel wasn't about one mistake. It was about the culture that let it happen, and the silence that let it grow. Within 48 hours, a company-wide meeting was called across all Brooks and Dorel locations. No media, no press release. Just a room full of general managers, floor supervisors, HR reps, and Celeste Brooks seated at the head of the table. She didn't bring lawyers. She didn't bring PR consultants. She brought the footage, the audio, the statements from Monica and every staff member who had watched it unfold. She played it once, no commentary. Just the sound of a man in power assuming he knew who didn't belong, and the silence that followed it. Then she looked around the, "Tom, you all represent my name, my son's name, and if you think your job is to protect this brand without protecting the people inside it, you're mistaken." No one spoke. Gregory Whitmore had been tolerated for years, not because he was exceptional, but because he was connected. Staff had whispered about his condescension, his favoritism, the way he brushed off complaints from younger employees, especially those who didn't look like him. but no one had dared challenge him, until now. At Maison Dorel, changes came fast. Monica, who had stood at the front desk with hesitation but ultimately spoke the truth, was promoted to floor supervisor. Not just as a reward, but as a message. Courage, even under pressure, matters. The assistant general manager, who quietly coordinated Gregory's removal, was given expanded authority across the region. Training was rewritten, policies updated. Not to cover the scandal, but to prevent the next one. And while management reshuffled, something subtler happened too. Back at Elijah's school, the silence around him shifted. Classmates who once laughed quietly at Savannah's digs now looked at him differently. Not with pity, not with fear, but with respect. Teachers, once complicit in their quiet, began to take notice. A literature teacher who had once let Savannah's comment slide now paused mid-lesson one afternoon and said, "Elijah, would you share your thoughts?" Her voice carried the weight of a small apology. "And Elijah?" he answered, calmly, thoughtfully, like he always had. Later, during lunch, one boy from another class walked by and said under his breath, "Heard what happened? That was something." Elijah didn't reply. He didn't need to, because something had changed. Not in how he saw himself, but in how others were learning to. Even Savannah felt it. In the lunchroom, in the hallways, at her locker. Her group had grown quieter, texts unanswered, group chats muted. The air around her was no longer admiration. It was distance. And though she didn't say it, didn't show it, she felt it, and it stung. Meanwhile, Celeste kept her focus where it mattered. One evening, days later, she sat across from Elijah. At the kitchen table, papers and business memos stacked neatly beside a warm dinner. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. Elijah paused. He didn't talk much about what had happened, not at home, not at school. He stirred his drink once, then looked up. "I didn't want anyone to be fired," he said. "I just didn't want to be treated like I didn't belong." Celeste reached across the table, taking his hand. "And you shouldn't have to ask for that," she said. That night, she stayed up reviewing internal reports, making notes in the margins. Not about profits, about people. Because this wasn't about protecting a brand. It was about building one that stood for something. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in with a clipboard and a checklist, steady as breath, unshakable as principle. And in the weeks that followed Elijah's quiet resistance, that's exactly how accountability took root inside Brooks and Dorel. Gregory Whitmore was gone, terminated with cause. His severance was rescinded after staff testimonies, and security footage confirmed not just what he did, but why he did it. He had acted not out of ignorance, but entitlement, out of assumption, and it was no longer tolerated. He tried, of course, to salvage what he could. A polished LinkedIn post spoke of creative differences and new opportunities. But the industry knew better. Because when Celeste made a decision, it didn't vanish. It echoed. Vendors began to call with subtle questions. Was it true? Was the footage real? And though she never gave an interview, the truth needed no amplification. It had already gone viral in boardrooms and employee forums, in whispered conversations between hotel managers and restaurant chains. Gregory's name became a cautionary tale, not because he fell, but because of why. Savannah, meanwhile, watched her world retract. Her private school scholarship had been part of Gregory's corporate package, eliminated the day his badge was. Deactivated. There was no transition meeting, no second chance. She received a printed letter in homeroom, enrollment terminated, her locker cleaned out by Friday. By Monday, she stood in the front office of a public middle school wearing a sweater. 2 seasons too old, clutching a plastic folder with intake forms and no familiar faces. No whispered admiration, no special treatment, just paperwork and silence. She didn't cry. Not then. But something in her posture bent. Not broken, but heavy. Back at Maison Dorel, a new culture began to take shape. Celeste didn't install cameras or stage an apology tour. She did something quieter and harder. She invested in people. Mandatory staff seminars launched across all locations, not just on customer service, on bias, on dignity, on how to treat every guest, not as a demographic, but as a person. She brought in facilitators, not celebrities, educators, former staffers, even a former hospitality worker who'd once been kicked out of a five-star venue for looking lost. She sat in the first row of each session. Monica, now floor supervisor, helped design the new orientation. Her voice, once quiet behind the reception desk, now carried weight. When new hires asked her why these modules mattered, she didn't give theory. She told the story. And every time their faces changed. In private, Celeste reviewed letters from staff, some anonymous, some not. One from a dishwasher read, "I've been here 4 years. It's the first time I felt seen." And Elijah, he didn't talk much about what happened, but he walked a little taller. His name was added to the executive guest list, a policy change his mother implemented silently, but he didn't use it, not yet. Instead, he accepted a spot in a summer mentorship for young civic leaders, not because of what happened, but because of who he already was. One afternoon, he sat in the restaurant's quiet lounge reading a book. A server passed by, paused, and said softly, "You're the kid, aren't you?" Elijah looked up, unsure what to say. The server smiled. "You changed the room without raising your voice. That's rare." Elijah didn't smile back. He just nodded once, turned the page, and kept reading, because some victories don't need applause. They just need to be remembered. Gregory Whitmore tried to rewrite the story. He called it a misunderstanding, a lapse in process, a teachable moment. But the footage said otherwise. The staff testimonies, sharp, detailed, unwavering, sealed his fate. No future employer called. The old favors dried up. His name no longer unlocked doors. It raised eyebrows. For a man who once measured worth in titles and square footage, the silence that followed was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. Savannah fared no better. Her old friends faded fast, unsure whether reaching out was loyalty or liability. At the new school, no one cared who her father was. The lunchroom didn't bow. The teachers didn't smile extra. She wasn't targeted, just unseen. And in that invisibility, she found something new. Something Elijah had lived with for years. The tension of being misread before being known. There were no tears, no apology posted on social media, no dramatic reckoning. But some days, walking home in shoes no longer designer, Savannah would pass a bus stop and see someone look at her the same way she once looked at Elijah, with judgment, with dismissal. And in those moments, she felt it. Not guilt, not enlightenment. Just the weight of seeing, at last, the full shape of her own reflection. Elijah never gloated. He never told the story at school. Never posted about it. But people knew. Some classmates gave him nods in the hallway, quiet acknowledgments that didn't need words. A few asked questions, not to gossip, but to understand. Elijah answered only when it mattered. One day, in a group discussion, a teacher asked, "What does justice mean to you?" Elijah waited, then said softly, "It's not about punishing people. It's about making sure they can't pretend anymore." And that was it. Celeste continued her work quietly. She never mentioned Gregory again, but every hiring decision, every staff meeting, every policy review now carried a silent echo of that day. She didn't talk about culture change. She created it, and at Maison Dorel, the atmosphere shifted. Servers made eye contact. Hosts double-checked assumptions. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Elijah's presence had left an imprint, not just as the CEO's son, but as the moment the room learned to listen. The last time Elijah and Celeste dined there, months later, they sat by the window, sunlight spilling over the tablecloth. A new server approached, nervous, attentive, respectful. No tension, no performance. Just service. As they finished dessert, Elijah looked around. "It feels different now," he said. Celeste smiled. "That's because you changed it." He looked out the window, thought for a moment. "I didn't want anyone to be ruined," he said quietly. "I just wanted to be treated like I belonged." Celeste reached across the table and took his hand, her voice softer than the candlelight between them. "And now," she said, "you always will be, because in a world too often tilted toward arrogance and assumption, this time, just this once, integrity stood its ground, and it held."